Most of us do turn to porn to get our sex ed because that's something that's easily accessible. What a lot of young people fail to understand is that mainstream porn can be very misleading for a lot of people. A 12-year-old child viewing this content and also learning the fact that it's okay to be forced into sex. We are actually contributing to rape culture and crimes against women. Here are some pressing questions that we need to ask ourselves. How many of you got sex ed at home or at school? Any sex ed at all? I'm so sure that so many of you are saying no right now. Well, the story was not any different for me. I was a young girl in 5th grade, went up to my mom and I went like, Mama, ये sex तो मुझे पता है क्या होता है, पर ये safe sex क्या होता है? My mom just smiled. She did not utter a word. And I was naive. I was actually referring to gender at the time that you saw, while filling forms, which was male or female at the time. I was referring to that as sex. And now, after 20 years, my mom just laughs about this when she tells me this as a story. But you know what? The joke is on me. And so many of us who don't get any sex ed at all. But right before my wedding, I got a crash course in sex ed. It was honestly smaller than even a tweet. My mom told me, keep your husband happy. I'm so sure that all of you know what happy really means here. But who's to blame now? My nanny never had any conversation with my mother, and my mother did not have any conversation with me. There was no education happening, no conversation happening there, and this lack of conversation is normalized from one generation to the next. And that's also one reason why a lot of young people end up making misinformed and reckless decisions. Hi, I'm Sachi Malhotra, the founder of thatsassything.com, a new age sexual wellness brand that designs non-toxic premium products that are good for your bodies. Our goal is to normalize all intimate conversations related to our bodies, be it sex, periods, masturbation, pleasure, body hair. I think the list is never ending. And also really sass the patriarchy, one conversation at a time. So I have a hormonal condition called PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, because of which I've been a big girl and have had excessive hair growth all over my body. And also in places that are not considered normal for women. I've had excessive facial hair and, that invited a lot of unsolicited advice from parents, relatives, friends, everyone around me. A lot of the comments also that I had to hear involved things like patli ho jao or sundar lagogi. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, all of this a lot. So a lot of the conversation was around what was happening externally, around my body. Now again, this is what the problem is. The approach towards education is more reactive than it is proactive. It feels like a mere tick mark. It's something you have to get done. Almost like damage control. So this is how it went like in school. Teachers would come to the classroom, make girls sit in one row and boys in another row. Of course, everything was stripped down to the binary. Let's not even get to how problematic that is. But I remember this sense of awkwardness that teachers had, just wishing to storm out of the room, at any second. And when it went to what they were teaching us, what was in the textbooks, the chapters stop at the reproduction of plants and flowers. They didn't even go to the reproduction of human beings. So they didn't even go to what happens to our bodies. That was completely skipped, and that information just remained in the textbooks. Now we could very apparently see how uncomfortable the teachers were getting. They just wanted to rush out of the classroom, and so they did after just a 45-minute session, after they vomited all the words out. So now that we've established that we don't get any sex ed at school or at home, how and where do we get our version of sex ed from? And the answer to that is mainstream porn. Sad but true. When we're expected to figure it out just like our parents did and their parents did, we turn to this version of unreal, perfect-bodied adult stars in a studio in LA. Now, most of us do turn to porn to get our sex ed because that's something that's easily accessible. And also, I think it's one way to learn about sex because no one else is really ready to talk about it. Now, what a lot of young people fail to understand is that mainstream porn can be very misleading for a lot of people. It is very different from, and I would say far from the reality. And that's something that can really affect the psyche of young people. The age at which most of us consume porn is actually not the right age for us to decipher the difference between what's real and what's staged. A lot of young people also don't understand or don't know the fact that a lot of these stars, a lot of these actors are actually forced to perform. And by the time we know the truth and we learn how things actually work, the damage has already been done, and sadly it's irreversible at that age. And mainstream porn mostly shows you women that are totally hairless and flawless. That's also one of the reasons why products like vaginal lightening and tightening and brightening creams and serums are actually one of the largest selling products, but also the most problematic in the personal care segment. And you know what? A lot of people have actually come up to us, that Sassy thing, as a brand as well, and they've asked us for products that could lighten their pubic area region or their underarms. I feel really bad when I, see those requests coming from people, because as a brand, we vow to never ever make problematic products that actually feed on people's insecurities. And I also think that these insecurities stem from this idea of, our obsession with fairness as a culture. Similarly, a lot of young men have the pressure of performing. That's also because the content that they consume and what they see on screen is a totally different version of manhood, I would say. They see things like, men that are completely well built, have six-pack abs, and that's something that really fuels the insecurities that they have in themselves and really affects their psyche in that sense as well. Here are some pressing questions that we need to ask ourselves. Where did the body hair go? What about people with big bodies who might not have washboard flat stomachs? What about those dimples and pimples on the skin? And those stretch marks, they're never shown. What about people with disabilities? Why are they hypersexualized and reduced to a mere fetish? Let's also talk about what happened to safe sex. Why does porn always glorify unprotected sex? One of the things that young people fail to understand, and porn never really shows, is safe sex. You usually see people having unprotected sex. And you know what? That leads to a lot of confusions that young people have. A lot of people are not aware of the fact that having unprotected sex could actually lead to STIs and STDs. And a whopping 6% of India's population every year is affected by STIs and STDs. Since there is a lot of confusion around the topic, and that's something that people don't have enough conversation around, you would find a lot of questions around the topic on Google as well. And one of the most searched for answers on Google is to the question, will I get pregnant if I have unsafe sex, unprotected sex, just this once? And now let's come to one of the most important points, consent. I'm so sure that many of you have not seen consensual sex in porn. For example, a person sitting next to another person, asking them, may I touch you? May I kiss you? Let alone have sex with you. With a lot of rape and date rape fantasy porn floating around the interwebs unregulated, it could really affect the viewers and do a lot of damage. It could affect them in more ways than one and really normalize this idea of non-consensual sex. And that is really problematic. Now imagine a 12-year-old child viewing this content and also learning the fact that it's okay to be forced into sex. Imagine what it's like when they're actually having this sexual encounter on their own without any knowledge about consent or what that looks like. That sounds scary beyond belief. What a lot of people fail to understand is that a person does not consent to sex by the way they talk or the way they walk or how they dress up. It's a very clear question of yes or no. It's as simple as that. In mainstream porn, the end goal is always the orgasm. And when we view that content, that's what we start expecting from our sexual experiences. However, once we start getting sexually active, a lot of us may not experience orgasm the way that they show in porn or experience orgasm at all. And that's when expectations don't meet reality. The grooming that porn ends up imparting brings about a lot of insecurities in us. It makes us question things like, what if I don't look like the women in porn? Will my partner still find me desirable? Will they still be attracted towards me? We shame and judge ourselves so much that those insecurities get deeply ingrained in us. We carry those insecurities to different parts of our lives. That's something that I personally did as well. I was insecure about my body and my body hair, and I let that affect my friendships, my relationships. I was not comfortable in my own body, so I really carried that to the bedroom as well. I carried it to my own relationships. I thought that my partner would judge me for the way I look. But you know what? It was only sometime later that I realized that it was me. I was judging myself all this while. To conclude, I would like to say that we all need to start having conversations. We need to start talking about our experiences, our emotions, our expectations. We need to talk about our vulnerabilities. Because I think once we start doing that, that will really fuel conversations, which will also lead to bringing empathy, kindness, and self-love in terms of how we view sex and how we view our own bodies. Our school, colleges, and homes need to address the fact that enough is not being done to impart holistic sex ed. And this is something that can affect the psyche of so many of us negatively. It can affect our lives very negatively. And I think this is also to say that it's not about having that awkward 45-minute session or, just a tick mark conversation just for the heck of it. It has to happen in a more holistic, comprehensive way. When we are raising a generation of youngsters who have been misinformed by mainstream porn, we are actually contributing to rape culture and crimes against women. This is an undeniable fact that we've looked away from long enough. Not anymore. We need to unlearn the very idea of not talking about it just because your mom didn't and their mom didn't. And that's how we'll take the shame out of it. There's so much to learn about people, their bodies, their genders, relationships, and so much more. Let's change that and let's get started. The kind of content that we are consuming at a young, impressionable age is far from reality, but it has far-reaching consequences. Teachers, educators, and parents really need to step up their sex ed game if we are to build a kind, empathetic, and safe world. I hope you liked hearing what I had to say. Please do leave your thoughts as comments below. Thank you.
Josh Talks is now a Spotify exclusive podcast. The audio version of our talks will be available only on Spotify. If you like this video and you like to listen to more inspiring stories like this, please follow the Josh Talks podcast only on Spotify.
क्योंकि आप जोश टॉक्स देख रहे हैं, जाहिर सी बात है कि आप अपनी जिंदगी में आगे बढ़ना चाहते हैं। ये जाहिर सी बात है कि आप अपनी जिंदगी को सीरियसली लेते हैं, आप वो सारे स्किल्स एक्वायर करना चाहते हैं जिससे आप जिंदगी में तरक्की कर सकें, लोगों से आगे बढ़ पाएं। और अगर ये सच है तो जोश टॉक्स का ही एक ऐप है जोश स्किल्स, जहां एग्जैक्टली इसी चीज को करने के लिए बहुत ही खूबसूरत बहुत सारे कोर्सेज बनाए गए हैं। कोर्सेज जो लाखों स्टूडेंट्स ऑलरेडी ले चुके हैं। ये कोर्सेज स्पेसिफिकली सिर्फ एजुकेशनल नहीं है जहां आप एक्सेल स्किल्स, पावर पॉइंट स्किल्स और ये सब सीख सकते हैं, बल्कि लाइफ स्किल्स भी हैं जहां आप पब्लिक स्पीकर कैसे बना जाए वो सीख सकते हैं, आप कॉन्फिडेंस कैसे एक्वायर कर सकते हैं वो सीख सकते हैं, आप हेजिटेशन के बिना कैसे बोलें वो सीख सकते हैं, आप अपनी पर्सनालिटी कैसे डेवलप कर सकते हैं वो सीख सकते हैं। हर एक कोर्स में डेली क्विजेज हैं, एक्सरसाइजेज हैं, एक बहुत ही खूबसूरत कम्युनिटी है जो आपको सपोर्ट करेगी, आपको इनकरेज करेगी। तो अगर आपको ये टॉक पसंद आया हो, जोश टॉक्स जो करता है वो पसंद है, तो आपको जोश स्किल्स भी बहुत बहुत ही फायदेमंद लगेगा। आज ही डाउनलोड करें जोश स्किल्स का ऐप और उनके कोर्सेज एक्सप्लोर करके अपनी जिंदगी को